I'm just wondering, is the milling the only processing step before I have my applique? Or are there coming more processing steps? Because if so, I would believe I would need to factor this in here.
Okay, I mean, it's putting that together. Your sequence of functions on top, it says cassava production, intermediary trade, milling, article making, trade.
No,
these are 5 stages, and inside those stages, of course, there are the different processes which are not mentioned here. So
they are factored in already?
They are factored in, yeah.
Okay.
So you can make a difference between, say, a stage of the value chain, where you can say, okay, what do they do, the yellow boxes, yeah, and you can go up and they say they do milling and article making. But of course that is reducing it, and if you would do a more complete business model canvas, you would be able to specify exactly each individual step.
No, I'm happy to hear that it's factored in, because I know it only from the Gari production in Ghana, and I know the people who are doing the milling are usually also doing the other steps, and that would require more also investment into machinery the moment I have automatically more milled cassava. So, but if you are telling me that's factored in here, then it's fine.
Yeah, well, it just sums up a particular stage of the value chain. Yeah.
Before I move on to questions, I just want to make a remark. We are showing with this table and with the following tables a series of figures, and we are relating now to a specific example, which is ATK production. But what we are aiming to do here is actually to indicate what are the critical parameters that you can look at when you do business model analysis, and that from those parameters you can actually extrapolate indications to take a decision. Am I going to promote a certain business model? Is this financially viable? What implication does it have in terms of labor force? What implication does it have in terms of energy consumption? What are the financial investments that my partner enterprises or very small scale enterprises need to count with? And I think this linkage between business model and finance is one of the critical elements that we cannot really assess unless we go through this kind of analysis. And I allow myself to call in the colleagues that are working on agricultural finance who are here in the room with us in Bonn, to ask them a question in terms of what is the business model analysis good for from your point of view in order to facilitate access to finance. I'd like to hear from your side what is sort of your understanding of business model analysis and what you think this is good for in terms of facilitating access to finance, what you need to look at if you want to move that additional step. Yeah, that's for you. If you are looking at it from the point of view of facilitating access to finance for new business models, what is your attention focusing on? What kind of parameters are for you, from a finance point of view, critical in order to say, yes, access to finance possible, is financially viable, is an attractive business model, or no, this is not interesting for us?
I think as a financial institution, you are, to be honest, not so much interested about the social or something conditions. It's rather the profit. I mean, this seems to be a very good case if everything is well and correctly calculated. Then, of course, you look at the whole household also, like what other costs would be there. Maybe other business lines, often they do not probably do this, but I don't know, grow other things. So that's good. I mean, this is the kind of calculation you have to do, and I think this is what banks or financial institutions are missing, the knowledge of agriculture, like we called it in our project, like kind of hardcore calculation, really to see the numbers. Bankers are interested in numbers. I mean, it's a very simplistic view, but in the end of the day, it's often true. Yeah. So they are not so fascinated that by the business case or whatever, but they are fascinated if they see that the profit triples or whatever, and that is what they would be interested in, and often they lack this knowledge. So I would say this is definitely a good thing.
And two more points, I guess. Two more points. The first one would be actually to ensure that the supply is ensured, that if you have the capacity to produce more ATK, that you also get the raw material. And if you don't have the raw material, then actually the whole capacity that you have is good for nothing, and the market, that whatever you produce, you can actually sell it and sell it at a price that makes sense for you, so economically. So this would be also important for the financial institution to actually know, and they would like to assess it.
That was actually my question. Now, you said that in the next slide, the cost per ton at Teke, or however that's pronounced, goes exponentially down, but is it still competitive on the market? Because you said that there's also a lot of import from Côte d'Ivoire. Is it still competitive, or is it just a closed down business model? Okay, if you do that, you're going to have more profits, but the moment you put it on the market, nah.
Well, I mean, as you've seen, the unit cost goes down. So it is, in fact, you're safer if your unit cost is lower. And in fact, yes, the competition with imports has been important all along. But now, at what point, that would be another calculation. At what point do you reach your competitiveness? In fact, the importers bringing it from Ivory Coast also need to transport, have all the hassle along the line. Maybe some import taxes, whatever, so the competitiveness has been always given, I think, with imports. And as you are reducing cost, it makes the whole product more attractive. You could even think of a lower sales price in the end. But I must say, I don't want to go too far here, because I don't, in fact, have all the numbers, and I don't know exactly how the evolution of ATK end prices in consumer markets have been. But that could be another effect. And of course, I mean, if the end price goes down as we are producing more ATK, then our business model will change again, and the profits will certainly be lower. So there are always those repercussions.
And maybe one more comment from the financial side, if you want to say so, is of course you also have to see the whole scale of the value chain. I mean, okay, if it is, I'm exaggerating now, only 2 millers in the end, the banks are okay, we can finance them, but they would not put much effort. But if you're saying we're having 150 possible here, and in another region there's another 500 or something like this, so that of course gets then to a much more interesting business case for a financial institution to say like, okay, and obviously we'll know that how many, or you have an estimation on how many could improve their business to a mechanized way, and then because that is also something that financial institutions would be interested. So what could be the financing demand overall?
So the size of the industry.
Absolutely.
One point regarding the imports. No? So one point regarding the price of the imports. In that sense, I guess the financial institutions are generally actually, the business model actually should also look into it to benchmark the prices, production prices, because if you have your production price or if you have production cost in we're talking about here in Burkina Faso, and you have your ATK coming in from Ivory Coast. So in Ivory Coast you have the production cost, you have the transport, you have the import taxes, and then you have the sales price. So the sales price, if it's actually exactly the same as we have the production cost of ATK in Burkina, that means that the people in Ivory Coast are producing at a much lower cost than in Burkina, and that would be interesting. Why is that so? And what can be done actually to produce, or let's say to have to lower the cost more in Burkina? Means this would be actually, but I would be interested in knowing why is this difference. This is a classical, we might also have the same question in rice, where you have to compete against a Thailand production. So you have to know at what price the people are producing.
I mean, of course, as we've said, the business model is part of the value chain. You have to understand markets and price trends, and that applies to the industry at large, not to that particular enterprise, but to the whole thing. So it is necessary to have that information, and I fully agree to what Fakas said. Let me also add one more point. You may not have noticed, but in the outline of Value Links 2.0, we have a module on value chain finance, and we've been working together on that one, and it looks at financial solutions. So in fact, when we say here we need 6,500 investment, in long-term capital, then where would that money come from? And would it be attractive? Or for what kind of financial institution would that type of credit be attractive? Is it a microfinance institution, or is $6,000 already too much for them? Here is really a question, and I think looking for those financing solutions is yet another task, and we have devoted an entire module of value links to that question. So if you say here that that's a good business model, but that does not necessarily mean that it can put into practice if there is no bank, no financial institution interested. And then what happens, and this has been the case in Burkina Faso, is that some NGOs jumps in, and simply subsidizes or even gives equipment to the micro enterprises, because after all, for the likes of GIZ or other international agencies, a few $1,000s is nothing. The question is that a good idea if you would take over the investment cost? And my answer to this is maybe, maybe not, but one condition needs to be fulfilled. Before we invest anything into an enterprise like this, we should be sure that we are not leading these enterprises in a wrong direction. And very often, if we take all the responsibility away from the private sector and we say, okay, they don't have access to money, and we're just taking over the investment cost, and may not have looked into the numbers too much, we are exactly creating the wrong type of investment, or at least have a high risk of doing the wrong thing. So I would still think that a financial solution is required in which this is really left to the financial sector and to enterprises themselves. But still, there is a problem to actually get that money. Here is a contradiction, I think, and this is where we are always looking to the financial people to help us along. At least on our side, we've done something.
I need to begin a couple of questions from the web platform. One question is from Malawi and says, SME usually do not have only one business model, but they are doing several things at one time. How do we bring this in a business model analysis?
Yeah, that's a good point. Now we are getting to, in fact, the household and livelihood perspective. And yes, you are fully right. We have to also, if we take it from a household perspective, look for other sources of income which constitute their business models of their own. So in fact, and I think that is indeed maybe a weakness of the tool, that in the business model canvas we are focusing on one value proposition, maybe a second one, but we cannot with one business model, the philosophy of the business model canvas, capture the whole livelihood strategy of a household.
Okay. Can I help? Of course, I'm not doing this as much as you do, but I think, I assume the most important is that it is the main income stream. At least I mean, if this is, of course, only 10% of the whole business of a person or a small company, then the model will not work. I mean, it will work, but that will not tell us much. But if this is the main source of income, I think it still gives us a good input, like how this entrepreneur or how this small business will work. And of course, there's still the problem that there are one, two others, but if this is the main income revenue stream, like I don't think we are so bad with this kind of stuff.
There's also another answer to this. Of course, we also have other tools. Business model analysis is not the only tool. If you think of self-employed micro entrepreneurs, so really the likes of the atike makers here, then there is, of course, livelihood analysis of those groups, also a tool in which you look at different sources of income and how they combine each other, and that might be necessary even to understand the system. I can tell you that in the artisanal business model that I presented as the starting point, that is very likely the case, because it depends very much on how much labor you invest. And if you don't have neighbors working for you, or you yourself have limited time, then you can scale down that activity very much. So it's more flexible and it responds to the livelihood conditions. At the same time, of course, it also only gives you very limited income. I would think that that changes if you are really doing the investment into the electrical mill. Then it becomes more of an entrepreneurial model and necessarily would have to occupy the time and the thinking of that entrepreneur much more, because now I have done an investment and I have to make sure that it is running. So I would think that that livelihood perspective is an important tool, specifically if we are at the smallest level, at the smallest scale of those micro enterprises. As soon as we are investing and maybe taking loans on equipment, it will necessarily have to occupy a larger share in the livelihood strategy of that household altogether.
A couple of questions are coming in on the relationship between farmers, middlemen, and markets. So what are the implications of linking farmers directly to markets, and how do we deal with the fact that we are cutting out the middlemen, bypassing their business models?
That's not the case in the ATK. You are now referring to
it's a general question.
To something else. I don't know whether there is really a general answer to give to this. Let me try first to say that if you do a value chain analysis and a value chain mapping, and it includes collectors in rural areas, then very many people have the tendency to say, okay, these are intermediaries who are in a monopolistic position and they are making excessive money, etc. I think most studies show that this is not the case. You don't, as a small trader, you don't make necessarily more money than anyone else. You may be very inefficient in your trading activities, and therefore your cost of trading the produce is high, and that could give the impression that as there is a big difference in buying prices and selling prices, a large profit would be involved, which in reality, if you look closer into the business model of the small trader, disappears because of the losses, because of road taxes, you name it, infrastructure. So much on intermediaries, just to make sure that we understand they have their function, they have their business model as well. And then now, if you say from the perspective of a farmer, should he or can he, in fact, bypass those traders? And that brings me back again to the value chain map, in which you have, of course, certain functions. Now, if you only have trade as a function, it doesn't specify exactly what it means: bulking, storing, financing the purchase, etc. A number of functions. I'm not so sure whether farmers can take over those functions and expand their own production business model by taking over trading functions. That's normally not easily combined. Only if you form a cooperative, and then the cooperative or farmers can take those functions over. This is how it normally works. So it really depends. I think that we have to look at the business models of all those implied and ask ourselves, first of all, now, that intermediary trader, what kind of business model does he or she have, and can we do something to increase marketing efficiency? That could be an approach that addresses them directly. Or else do we say, okay, this is so inefficient, maybe we have to look for a different sales channel through a cooperative solution. Then we'll have to look into the cooperative solution as a business model yet again. So it always brings us back to that question. And I don't think that there is a general answer one can give. It needs a closer look into the specific case.